Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Marketing Mix Unmixed Episode 8. Today, we have from the beautiful land of Australia, Ben Oliver. Ben Oliver is a marketing and retail media expert, and he's also a successful entrepreneur with a successful exit. Ben, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm well, thanks, Venkat. Thanks for having me on. Great to be here. It's been a while since we've chatted, so yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, very true, Ben. Just the first question. How did you get started in marketing and media?
I've had a very long and strange journey. I my original calling was in journalism actually, and I started that straight out the gate at uni, and then did that for a number of years. I then did the UK expat thing, and lived in a hovel in London for a couple of years. Eventually, I came back to Australia and realised I couldn't just be a tour guide all my life. I had to do something a bit more serious. So then, first of all, I got involved in public relations. My cousin was actually working in PR and suggested I might enjoy that. And I think entourage and the idea of working in agencies just seemed cool and sexy at the time. So, I mean, working in an agency is nothing like that. But anyway, that was kind of my first leap from journalism into I guess marketing professions, and then did PR for a bit. Then from there moved into social media. From there moved into digital marketing, and then started getting across things like SEO and CRO and content marketing, and then eventually worked my way into media. And then along the way, yeah, worked at a couple of different agencies. Then my last job before I joined Mars, I was at Treasury Wine Estates for about 7 years, and I helped build the in-house biddable media function there before joining Mars about nearly 9 months ago. I was their head of media and ICP for ANZ. So yeah, it's been a very strange zigzag journey, but I like to think it's made me a more well-rounded marketer. At least that's my excuse for not having come straight out of uni. But yeah, that's how I got here today.
Yeah, but that's a great journey. And they say that people who work in PR understand branding and marketing better. But yeah, I think you have moved up the value chain very nicely. Uh,
Potentially, yeah, I don't know. Some might say that, some might argue the opposite, but yeah, no, I like to think so. Yeah.
yeah. Ben, you have also been a successful entrepreneur with an exit. What is the secret mantra of your entrepreneurial success?
Yeah, so for your listeners, I started a walking tour company about 7 years ago. I kind of alluded to this before. I worked in Europe as a tour guide, and then when I came back to Melbourne, I had this idea that I could start a tour company and be rich and famous. And none of those things really happened, but I did enjoy the process of building something from scratch. I did sell it last year, which was great, and the guys who bought it are brilliant, and they're smart, and they're they're taking it to a place I don't think I could have taken it to. I think the the secret to look, I mean, it's not as if I got out of it with $1 million kind of like exit package, but the business was profitable, and it did take a long time to get there. And tourism is a razor thin margin business. I think. I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine who also works in tourism, and he started a business, and he was about 6 months in, and I remember him saying to me, "Geez, this is hard, Ben. Like, God, this is hard graft, and I'm not making any money." And I'm like, "Mate, you're 6 months in. Like, what is it? Half of all businesses fail in the first 12 months, and I think 70-80% fail within the first 2 years." So I just said to him, "Look, this is a marathon, mate. Like, every day feels like a week, but." So I think, not that I'm a serial entrepreneur. I mean, I started and exited one company, but if there's anyone looking to start a company, the best advice I can give is just you got to play the long game. Like, particularly in the first 6 to 12 months, every decision feels gigantic and enormous, and then you look back and realize that a lot of these decisions probably didn't move the needle in and of themselves substantially. But I think if you take a long view and accept that I mean, like, it's not that dissimilar to having kids, right? It's a hard graft for the first, well, my kids are 6 and 4 now. I would say it's a hard graft for the first 2 to 4 years, and then it starts becoming easier. And I think businesses are not dissimilar. So you got to take the long view, I think. If you're too focused on the short term, it'll the pressure of profitability, I think, becomes a bit crushing. But if you can accept that it'll happen, it's just not going to happen straight away. I think that's a better place to be psychologically.
Mhm. As an entrepreneur, you tend to, make your own brand, create your own brand. Do you think creating your own brand, makes you understand the brand specificity much better?
Yeah, I think there's a difference between understanding the principles of brand and actually being in the weeds and actually executing. I think it's like all things, right? Some people are very good at strategy and some people are good at tactics, and the best ones can do a bit of both. I think for me, I probably understood the principles when I got into starting my own company, but they were certainly reinforced by the practical application um, of that. And I think about what's a good example? I mean, just even like, the thought that I put into the logo, right? Like that, I probably spent way too much time thinking about that. But, the colors that I used and what did I want them to represent and how did that ladder back to my brand compass and, all those kinds of things. So I think it helps to be in the tools if you can. But not necessarily, but I think nothing. It depends what kind of learner you are. I'm very much I learn by doing, and I think for me that's how I do it. Not everyone has that same approach or is wired that way, but I think a lot of the time it can help to do. Yeah.
You currently work at Mars, one of the world's most renowned brand out there. How would you define a brand, and what makes a brand more than just a product on the shelf?
Yeah, I tend to think of this from two perspectives, one from the view of the consumer and one from the view of the brand. From the view of a consumer, I mean, it's quite simple in my mind. A brand is just something you're willing to pay a premium for, and a brand you can define a brand by also what a brand is not, and the opposite of a brand is a commodity, and a commodity is not something that people want to pay a premium for. So, a brand is the opposite of that. If you're willing to pay a premium for a product, then usually that is because it is a brand of some sort. So, I think consumers don't spend a lot of time thinking about these things. Most of their purchases are done in a very system one, heuristic driven sort of way. Obviously, on the other side of the fence with the marketers, we talk about things like differentiation and distinctiveness and meaning and those kinds of things as how we get to that end goal of being able to drive a premium. But I mean, everything we do to create brands is because brands can charge higher prices and therefore derive higher profits. So, but I think what makes a good brand, I think I sort of take most of my inspiration from the Ehrenberg Bass Institute. If your listeners aren't familiar with them, they're a university research institute based out of University of Adelaide, led by a very sharp and well-dressed man called Professor Byron Sharp, and they talk a lot about the role of distinctiveness and just being visible and having assets that people can instantly recognize and those shortcuts to purchasing. On the other side of that is the more differentiation debate, which is more the David Adkin kind of thinking around brands need to be different. I think most marketing's moved on from differentiation as a key input. Some marketers talk about this idea of like meaningful differentiation, or like the idea would be that it's very hard for brands to own an attribute. So, like you take Coke, for example, Coke is refreshing, but Coke can't necessarily own the word refreshment. But what they can do is be relatively differentiated to their competitive set. So they could be viewed as being slightly more refreshing than their competitors, right? I was having this debate with the marketers today. I think there's a role for it. Do I think it's the most important thing? Probably not. It's very hard to be differentiated when the moment you're differentiated is the moment that a competitor finds a way to remove that point of differentiation. Distinctiveness, however, can last a lot longer. You think about these distinctive, I mean, what Ehrenberg Bass calls distinctive brand assets, or what Mark Ritson calls brand codes, and these ideas of colors and logos and shapes and sounds and even smells in some settings. That all of them are shortcuts to knowing that that's associated with your brand, and that's going to help someone get into buying a product over your competitive set or a white label. So yeah, that's how I tend to think about brand.
Yeah, that was a great answer. Talking about a related field, marketing effectiveness, how would you define what is marketing effectiveness?
You're hitting me with the hard ones today. It's what is marketing effectiveness? I mean, it is the pursuit of understanding what drives marketing outcomes, I suppose. And you know, in many businesses, marketers have become quite sales driven
Mhm.
businesses, and so effectiveness is then measured by how much money you can make. I think I tend to take the view that if we talk about marketing effectiveness, it all comes down to what you're measuring. And I take a maybe a slightly overly simplistic view that the role of marketing is to drive future growth, and the role of sales is to harvest immediate demand. And if that is well understood within the company, then the metrics by which you determine effectiveness and success should be cleaner and easier to follow. I think where it's gotten messy over the last couple of years is you've got marketers getting into performance marketing and what I would call sales, really. You've got retail media outlets now pushing further up the funnel and talking
Mhm.
about brand growth. And so this clean delineation between what is sales and what is marketing is quite different. But ultimately, marketing effectiveness for me comes down to a clear understanding of how are you being, like how are you judging success within your business? And if you can clearly understand the role that you're playing, then hopefully you should be, and the objectives you're setting, the KPIs should fall out of that. It sounds so easy, doesn't it? But obviously it's a very tricky one to get right. But yeah, I do understand why people struggle with this. It's a tough nut to crack.
Mhm. Uh, I follow you on LinkedIn. You have so many great, insightful takes. And one of your recent posts read, MM is the worst form of measurement except for all the others. Would you like to expand on this?
Yeah, I think you were one of the first ones to respond to that. Look, that was it was a bit cheeky. Yeah, I mean, I tend to put these things out there with my tongue firmly in my cheek just to kind of almost see what the reaction's going to be. Uh, what I was trying to say there is, look, I should first of all off the bat say straight away, I am a believer in MMM as an important part of the measurement toolkit. So it certainly wasn't. I had a few people from MMM circles give me a bit of a ribbing after. I'm like, no, like I'm on your side here, but. I think what we need to appreciate is that like all like I forget who said this, but all tools are wrong. Just some are useful, right? Or some are insightful. I'm paraphrasing from somewhere, but um, what I was trying to convey is that most measurement tools have some sort of failing or they're not perfect, right? Like an
Mhm.
MMM, despite the advancements, is that it's still the tool and it's still fallible and
Mhm.
depending which vendors you talk to, you'll get different philosophies on prize versus not including prize or how do we treat ad stock, and there's no one agrees on this stuff. So the point I was trying to make is just to remind people that there's lots of ways of measuring out there. They're not all perfect, but MMM is probably it's, I mean, the quote itself was inspired by a Churchill quote around democracy is the worst system of government despite all the others. But that was the point I was just trying to make is just to make sure people understand that there's no silver bullet to this measurement problem. It's got to be triangulated, and we've got to understand that we in marketing we work in a probabilistic field. You know what I mean? Like it's strange when I talk to marketers and they view this as if marketing is a deterministic endeavor, and it's not. Like nothing we do is deterministic. Like nothing in marketing you say if I do X, Y will always happen. And I think MMM, as I say, I love MMM, but MMM is seductive in that it gives you these beautifully precise numbers on return. It's still working off probabilities, right? Like, it's still not, I mean, I know you can do holdout tests and so forth, but, we still need to I think we need to treat MMM still more as a directional
Mhm.
tool rather than a Bible that we must follow religiously. I think that's when MMM really comes into its own, when you're not simply, saying, well, the MMM said we had to do this, therefore let's do that 100%, right? I think that there's got to be an understanding of its own fallibilities and how it best works within a measurement toolkit.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, when we are talking about holistic marketing measurement, I mean, MM is the best we've got because it tries to incorporate all the variables at play and how
Yeah,
they interact with each other. It's kind of like mimicking the marketing reality. And suppose if a company is just investing on, Meta and Google, and you just test on Google, you're leaving out Meta, right? And what we
yeah,
call as omitted variable bias. And
yeah.
MM kind of tries to solve that to try to bring in all the variables together and see its effect on the KPI. But yeah, so I'm totally with you on that in the sense that has to be done right, and if it's not, it can be giving you wrong signals.
Yeah, and like I mean, mate, this is your field far more than
Yeah.
mine, but like, even the you can't model the universe. You know what I mean? Like there's always going to be variables and things that the model just cannot account for, right? So like you model what you can, you accept what you can't, and it's this imperfect view of what how we think the world works, and it's good, but there's always got to be this understanding that like MMM is not designed to model every single tiny variable,
Yeah.
and if it could, we'd probably need more processing power than we've currently got available, right? So I think as long as people understand that, then it's a fantastic tool to use.
Yeah. Talking about another contentious issue, most of the marketing concepts and debates feel like a line drawn on the beach, only for the next wave to erase it. I mean, there are so many examples, right? For example, are there four P's in marketing or not? Are there something like a sales or marketing funnel? Where do you stand on all these debates? Do you think these things exist, or it's just an academic thing?
Oh, yeah. I mean, a lot of it is academic, right? And a lot of it's people who want to make a name for themselves. And it's, oh, the four P's are dead. They're now the four T's. And then the next day it's, oh, the four T's are gone. We're now calling it the four Q's. And I think I'm a bit cynical. I think a lot of it is just self-serving promotion by people
Hmm.
who don't necessarily think the four Ps are dead, but they want to give it their own particular spin. And a lot of the alternatives for the four Ps aren't particularly compelling as concepts. I think, Mark Ritson, one of my marketing heroes, I mean, he talks a lot about this. He's like, at the end of the day, the four Ps are still a great place to start when you're looking at your marketing suite. I mean, he talks about it more in the sense of like, these three stages of marketing where you kind of start off with research, then you get into strategy, then you get into tactics, and the P's really kind of sit more at the tactical end. And even before you get there, you're still looking at, you should be spending most of your time in the research phase, understanding the market, category insights, blah blah blah. So I think even the four P's itself needs to be taken in the context of
Hmm.
the wider role of marketing, which is much bigger than the tactical execution. I mean, and I think I'm a big fan of the buffet approach. I think there's good parts to all models, and I think the best models I've seen tend to kind of steal a bit from each. I think, and a lot of these models agree on more than what they disagree on, right? Like, um, so like a lot of the stuff that Ehrenberg Bass and Byron Sharp talk about, like Benet and Field wouldn't disagree with a lot of it. You know what I mean? The same with some of Aiken's stuff. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in about differentiation that's probably not as relevant these days, but there's still a lot. I mean, things about like brand associations, I think are incredibly relevant. So, I mean, for example, at Mars in the snacking section, they will look at category entry points, which are very Ehrenberg Bass, but they also track things like brand health, awareness, consideration. So I think, again, it's this por qué no los dos kind of approach, right? We don't. I think it's better to. Maybe I'm using wine, and I'll use a wine analogy. I prefer blends. I think blends are far more interesting and better than single vineyard offerings. That I think we should take more of a blend approach when it comes to marketing philosophy and decide what works for us. And I mean, shit, like for some people, and one approach is going to work. Is it going to work in another field? Maybe not. So yeah, I mean, as long as we're driving brand growth and outcomes, I mean, part of me wonders, does it really matter what model we all use? You know what I mean? But yeah,
Yeah. Sorry, I fused a lot of questions into one, and I think
that's all right.
this.
Hopefully, I
Yeah.
covered. Hopefully, I answered some of it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the question that I was going to follow up was, do you think there's something like a marketing funnel? Do you think people move from, the awareness stage, the consideration stage, and then the final purchase stage?
Yeah, the funnel's interesting. I had a while ago I caught up with a guy called Rob Britton, who is a marketing effectiveness expert. If any of your listeners don't know about him, look up Rob on LinkedIn. He's a really smart guy, and
Mhm.
he knows more about marketing effectiveness than I will ever know. But he and I we try and catch up every now and again for lunch, and it's me usually just asking him questions and him being very polite and me usually
Mhm.
paying the bill. But essentially, we were talking a bit about the funnel, and like I think people misunderstand the point of the funnel. Like the funnel is a diagnosis tool. It's not designed to actually mimic the consumer journey because I think all marketers appreciate that people don't move through in a linear well, I should say some people might move in a linear fashion
Hmm.
from awareness to consideration of purchase, but
Hmm.
most of the time it's far more circular, right? And so you see all these other models developed that say, oh, well, the funnel is dead, it's ridiculous, people don't move this way. But it's not tracking brand health through a funnel is not designed to mimic the consumer journey. It's designed to diagnose where you are weak in certain areas. So I think when you treat it like a diagnosis tool and not as a consumer journey mapping tool, it's far more useful and far more powerful. So do I think consumers will move in a straight line? No, I do not. But do I think the marketing funnel is an incredibly useful diagnosis tool? Absolutely.
Hmm. Yeah, great answer. You and I, as a founders of company, will agree that creating a brand is really a tough job, and creating memories about your company is again very tough. I mean, recently there have been news about rebranding. For example, Jaguar and Cracker Barrel. A lot of people say that it's kind of like hemorrhaging people's memory of the brand. Where do you stand on it? Should rebranding be done?
Oh, I mean, we're getting into territory that's a little bit outside my wheelhouse. I
Hmm.
will say most rebrands don't work, and
Hmm.
doing a rebrand well is incredibly difficult. And part of the reason most rebrands don't work is because consumers don't follow your brand like you do. And the moment you rebrand it and you change how you look on shelf, consumers can't find you and they just find the next best
Hmm.
substitute. So I think, again, I'm not a rebranding expert, but I think that's always the caution around the peril of rebranding. Is just I mean, there's the Oh, I've had a mental blank now. There's a famous orange juice brand that rebranded about 10 or so years ago.
Hmm.
And beautiful looking new package. I've totally forgot the name of the brand now.
Was it
Um,
Tropicana?
Tropicana, that's who it was.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Beautiful new package, very clean, very neat aesthetic,
Hmm.
and sales tanked 20% because
Hmm.
it wasn't because the packaging was bad. Consumers literally couldn't find it on the shelf anymore.
Hmm.
Um, as to those two particular examples, I mean, it's interesting. When the Jaguar thing first happened, my first reaction was, fuck, these guys have lost their minds. And then I sort of resisted from any public hot takes because I just didn't know. None of us will know as much about the strategic direction as those who work at Jaguar. I did hear, I think it was the marketing director on the John Evans podcast talk about it, and I got to say, despite what people think, they've clearly thought about what they're doing. Like they haven't just done this on a whim. Like everything they're doing is very thoughtful and very strategic. Is it the right approach? Time will tell, but they've clearly got smart people working there who have thought about this and
Hmm.
have mostly, in my opinion, solid reasons for doing what they're doing. Even the design of Jaguar is interesting because like people looked at the new car and were like, my God, this thing looks insane and blah blah blah. But they explain this that like when Jaguar's DNA has always been around designing cars that look like they're from the future. So the old school Jaguars now like people don't remember, but back in the 50s or 60s whenever it first launched, there was nothing like it. Like it looked like it had landed from outer space, and so that has always been part of their successful DNA, which is then reflected in how they've launched their new vehicle, right? So I think the hot takes on Jaguar need to be put on hold until the new car gets launched. Do I think they should have gone with a publicity without having a physical distribution? That's probably the one part of the
Hmm.
strategy I question, you know what I mean? Like having a 12 or 24-month gap between the teaser and then actually launching a product that I don't think they had a compelling answer for. But the rest of it, I don't know. I'm TBC on that one. Cracker Barrel, I don't think.
Hmm.
I'm not. Well, yeah. That I'm a bit more skeptical about that one. But I think on Jaguar, yeah. There's once they launch, let's see where it lands. Also, you got to remember Jaguar was in the death throes. Like I think they kind of saw it as well. What options do we have? You know what I mean? So again, the hot takes on Jaguar are kind of meaningless. Like, let's see what happens in 2 years, and then we can all, make our case for whether it was a good idea or not. But I will say, for any of your listeners, go to the John Evans Uncensored CMO podcast, listen to that interview, and I think it might give you a different perspective on how they've approached this strategically.
Hmm. I think at the end of the day, perhaps you know this better than me because you're from the PR industries. Formerly, there's nothing like a bad publicity. Every publicity is good publicity, right?
Yes and no. Like, depends on the nature of the publicity. Like, I
Mhm.
mean, I think Jaguar's publicity was very good. They got huge earned mentions. I mean, yeah, the nuance I'd say on no publicity is bad publicity is like, I don't know, like if you're ExxonMobil and you're dumping millions of gallons of oil into the ocean, that's probably bad publicity. That's just bad
Mhm.
publicity. But in the case, I mean, in the case of Jaguar, look, the amount of people. I mean, we are still talking about this.
Yeah.
When was the actual launch? A year ago?
I
So
think in
I
January,
don't
yeah.
know.
Yeah.
January, yeah, there you
December,
go.
January, yeah.
So we are still talking about this. So
Yeah.
I mean that alone, I think, perhaps gives us a clue to how successful it's been. But anyway, we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a report that the Gen Z generation, knows about Jaguar more through this scandal than from their fathers or, grandfathers. So that's an
Yeah.
interesting, yeah.
Well, yeah, it's funny on the because they've clearly identified younger cohorts as their future
Yeah.
source of growth, right? And it's interesting because the car's going to be priced at 100K, 100.
Mhm.
It's a premium price point. I'm not. Yeah, I don't know the exact. I know that it's expensive, and their argument is that Gen Z are one of the wealthiest cohorts coming through, and they're only going to be selling a limited number of cars per year. So it's very much a luxury. They're limiting their physical distribution purposefully in order to drive demand and to establish their luxury credentials.
Mhm.
I look, they've done more research on this. That's probably the other part of the strategy I'm curious on is like, will Gen Zs have as much money as they think they'll have? I mean, there's this whole argument that, boomers are, there's this huge intergenerational wealth transfer, right? That's happening at the moment. Are Gen Zs going to take that cash and buy a new Jaguar? Shit, maybe. I don't know. Like, again, they've done the strategy work on this and I haven't. But that was another thing I kind of raised my eyebrows. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. If you've got data to support it, then cool. It felt counterintuitive to me. But again, let's see.
Mhm. Let's switch gears and talk about another area of expertise of yours, that is the retail media. Uh,
Oh, yep.
do you think retail media is different from the other media? If so, what are the nuances?
Yes and no. I mean, I'm not really hands-on tools anymore, but like, I would say from if you're a media trader, then it's not that different from being in the guts of Meta or Google Ads. I mean, if nothing else, it's actually a much simpler optimization because the levers you've got to
Mhm.
optimize your ads are far more limited than if you were inside of Meta or Google Ads platforms. I mean, it's literally just like product solution,
Mhm.
sorry, product SKU, max CPC, and that's kind of it, right? Like it's so there's a lot of similarities to how media is currently traded. I think obviously the closed network nature of it on attribution, I should say, not incrementality, which we're going to get to. So I think there's a seductiveness about retail media, about that closed loop that makes it seem quite sexy, even though we are still talking about like, does it do attribution better than Meta and Google? Well, sure, but we're still talking about attribution. We're not talking
Mhm.
about incrementality. So I think there's a lot of similarities. But look, even the definitions of retail media do my head in. Like what is retail media ultimately? Like it is you are renting space on a retailer's assets, which we've
Mhm.
been doing for decades. Like we're just giving it a cool, sexy new name because it's digital. But I mean, shopper marketers have been buying gondola ends and off locations in store for forever. And I don't see it as being all that different, really. I mean, the tools to execute the media have been democratized and anyone can log into Amazon or Citrus or to buy these ads. So it's easier to buy than it was before. But ultimately, the goal remains the same. The retailers are renting out their space for brands to encourage immediate short-term sales. So and even like there are some companies who are selling retail media that is not self-service. It's all managed through the trade investment team. So I'm like, well,
Mhm.
how is that retail media? It's just shopper marketing, but you're
Yeah.
calling it retail media to make it sound sexy. So Yeah, I don't think it's a revolution. I think a lot of it is just putting new labels on things that we've been doing for a while.
Mhm. Interesting. As I told you, I've been following you on LinkedIn for quite some time, and I think one of your magnum opus articles is the Death of Personalization, Salesman.
Oh, well, I'd say my only at the moment, my magnum opus, mate. But thank you for that. Yeah, hopefully there's more articles coming. That one took me a while. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, can you speak about this article? Why do you think there's a death of personalization?
Yeah, so the inspiration for this mostly came from a lot of commentary from Sir Martin Sorrell, and and a lot of the tech forward agencies talking about personalization at scale and one-on-one messaging, and that's the future. And like, it just didn't sit right with me, and I wanted to understand why that didn't sit right with me, and create a framework in which to argue the opposite case. And so I went off and I spoke to a whole bunch of smarter people than me and did some research, and essentially, like, it came down to kind of answering three or four fundamental questions. Like, first of all, do consumers even want personalization at scale? Is probably the most important one. Secondly, can we actually do it? Like, is it technically feasible? And then the third part of it was, okay, if it is feasible, does it actually lead to better brand and sales outcomes? So, like, in order for the third one to be true, the first and second ones have to be true. So you sort of follow it logically. On the first point, I found there's this real distinction that if you ask a consumer, do they want personalization? They'll say yes. Then you ask them, do you find ads online creepy? They say yes. And no, and marketers find it really hard to square that circle. And I'm like, it's not hard. They want personalization on things like websites, or in environments where they're ready to purchase, right? So I think of it more in owned media assets. But then off that, they don't want ads following them around Meta and the open internet. Um, so, like, I think that's the distinction, and I think a lot of brand managers, marketers fail to understand they're not in conflict. They're actually perfectly in sync and make perfect sense when you look at it through that lens. So that's the first thing. So owned asset personalization, tick, offsite, cross. The second point is, can we actually technically do it? And it's a similar structure. So on owned assets where you're talking about CRM or SMS, where you've got much cleaner data pipes and data. Yeah, sure. Like, you can set up some pretty sophisticated CRM personalization systems. But off that, again, the answer is usually no. It's incredibly hard to match people, even like a Meta, which is crazy. Like, there was an incredible study done years ago. There's a Melbourne-based academic. Oh my God, I'm gonna have to look him up and remember him because he's very, very good. But he's done a whole bunch of studies on this, and he found that even Meta gets gender wrong like 30% of the
Mhm,
time. Like, this is an owned. This is a walled garden that has all your data, and they
mhm,
they are still serving ads to the wrong gender when you've set a gender parameter in your targeting. So this idea that we can accurate, and then that's it, that's in walled garden environments, let alone if you're talking about open web and you're relying on data brokers and matching cookies to IPs and all this kind of stuff. Like, it just, for the research that I found from talking to people is that and then also you've got things like ad blockers, which are now 30% in use. Then you've got Apple's tech solutions that are preventing targeting. So, like, then opt out from CDPs, and when you add all this together, it makes it, if not incredibly difficult, then certainly technically non-feasible. Then the third layer of this is, okay, well, let's just pull all that shit aside. Let's say you could do it and it was all technically feasible. Would it actually lead to an uplift? And again, the research seems to suggest no, that the problem you have is that if you want to personalize, that shit doesn't come for free. There's a CPM loading, whether it's from the audience data or the tech enablement or whatever that looks like. So in order for it to pay off, you need to be making incremental revenue in order to pay off the targeting and the tech enablement. And what happens is that brands who do this find that, okay, we get a 20% increase in effectiveness, but a 70% decrease in efficiency.
mhm.
So then your ROI would have been better through not personalizing at scale. And I I've put like every time I make a comment on LinkedIn about personalization at scale, and I have this argument, I wait for someone to come back to me with the opposing case, right? Like the article that I wrote, um, in a way, I was kind of preaching to the converted. Like I had a lot of people say, "Yeah, thank you for writing this. I totally agree," but no one who disagreed could give me a compelling counter argument, and I'm open to hearing it. Like I don't. I kind of wrote this because I just didn't think that it was feasible. And then, but what I'm really surprised by is that the lack of a coherent, clear message from the other side of the fence to say, no, Ben, this is why you're wrong, and here's 6 reasons why. And I'm still waiting. Like I wrote that article for Walk, I don't know, nearly 2 years ago. I did a revised version earlier this year, and I'm still waiting. So again, I'm happy to be proven wrong, but until then, I don't see a compelling case for personalization at scale. It is cheaper, it is more effective and efficient to go broad, and I can't see any studies that show me otherwise.
Mhm. I think there are a lot of articles and research supporting your point of view. If I remember right, I can't recollect the name of the book, but I think the book referenced Henry Ford, the car manufacturer in 20th
Oh
century.
yeah,
And he said that, I will manufacture cars in black and white, and all people care is whether it gets them from point A to point B. And he was
yeah,
very successful in 20th century, right? So yeah, that kind of, builds up to your point of view.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think people just forget is like whether it's DCO, whether it's like audience target, none of this stuff comes for free. Like, and most of the studies I see that try to make the case for personalization talk about, oh, this got a 20% uplift in effectiveness or a 20% increase in conversions. I'm like, yeah, but you haven't spoken about the cost. Like, so that's the thing that even if you can get away with, sometimes if they might include the upweight in CPM from audience targeting, they still have included the fact that they've used a CDP and the extremely high cost of rent of using a CDP. So yeah, again, happy to be proven wrong. I'm still waiting.
Let's talk about another, contentious issue, incrementality. Incrementality has become a buzzword of late. What's your opinion on this?
Oh, look, I'm glad we're talking about it. If it's great. I mean, I think we've been so focused on ROAS and attribution for far too long, and it's. I mean, you'd be laughing about this as much as me, but hearing Meta and Google and these guys who have had no interest in incrementality suddenly coming out and adding tools into their toolbox and talking about incrementality, and it's great. Like I'm glad that they're also expanding the definition of what drives success, but. I think it's great we're talking about it. I think once people get into it though, or once they get past the initial, even just explaining to people what is incrementality versus attribution, once you get past that, and you know better than I do, measuring incrementality and doing it properly is bloody hard. Like, I've come to realize this in my journey, but it's not just a simple matter of, oh, we'll get a test group and a control group, and yeah, great, we'll just hit one group with ads and then we'll just measure it. It's like, no, you've got to do a pre-test analysis and make sure you've chosen the right control group and the right test group. Are the trends aligned? Like, that piece of work is huge, and and then it's like, well, what type of methodology are we using an interval time series? Are we going to go with more of a difference in differences? Like, you need expertise to run this, and I think what I'm worried about is that. I mean, incrementality testing, it kind of falls into that MMM toolkit, I think, in many ways. Like,
Yeah.
you need people who know what they're doing. You need data scientists, you need measurement expertise, um, and you can't just run it without those people in the room. I mean, for me, people like me who are a bit self-taught on this, I am still incredibly wary of doing some of this stuff without having a data scientist do it with me. So I think that's my concern around this is that once the hype dies down and people actually start looking into it, they're either going to freak out and go, "Oh God, this is just too hard." Um, but I hope they get past that and go, "Okay, it's hard. That's true, but all marketing measurement's hard." And you know, um, I almost kind of see incrementality testing as almost like a gateway into MMM. I mean, ultimately, yeah, mate, I'd love your thoughts on this. Like, they
Yeah.
ultimately aim to answer the question of incremental returns, right? And I think in some ways, if you're interested in MMM, incrementality testing, if you're doing it with a proper vendor and with proper methodology, it's not a bad way to get into that space. And then sort of, I think a lot of companies who go from zero to a full-blown MMM, I wonder if they're missing a trick by not sort of experimenting with incrementality testing first. I don't know. Do you see it the same way or like,
Yeah, one thing that I agree with you is that, MM is the biggest incrementality test that you can do, because
yeah,
it kind of gives you the baseline first, and then the
yeah,
rest of it is the line item that you read, what is constituting to your sales over and above that, the organic sales that you've seen. Yeah, so MM is the biggest incrementality test that you can do. I'm of the view that, you can do a lot of other smaller incrementality tests post MMM, because when
mm,
you're doing smaller incrementality tests beforehand, you just don't get the full picture, because as I said
yeah,
before, a company could be investing in Meta, on Google, on TikTok, and if you're just checking one variable at a time, you're not going to get the holistic picture. MM
true.
kind of
Yeah.
provides you the holistic picture, and then you can test individual mediums post that. For example, you can check, hey, is TikTok really driving the needle of my sales as stated by MM? You can use experiments to validate MMM rather than
Yeah.
using experiments to validate MMM. That's my view.
Yeah, yeah. No. You're absolutely right. I think the other thing I'd say from a company point of view is that a lot of the difference between MMM and incrementality comes down to cost and time to insight.
Yeah.
you know. And MMM for a lot of companies is a big investment. Whereas with incrementality testing, you can get away with, cheaper, sort of smaller
Mhm.
pilots. So I think looking at it purely from an investment point of view, that is attractive to companies to be able to sort of do something small and then learn. And then the time, the insight horizon, I think MMM is getting a lot quicker. But for some companies where the refresh rate on their MMM is not regular, um, incrementality testing for mine's always been a nice way to get a short-term directional steer, then use the MMM to help validate, is it actually
Mhm.
is it actually doing what we think it's doing? Like I think sometimes that can be a nice way to go about it. But to your point, I mean, you should be doing both. I
Yeah.
think ultimately, yeah,
Agreed.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, do you think brand marketing kind of makes life difficult for performance marketing?
No, I think the opposite actually, and there's been plenty of studies to show this. So TikTok did a study last year where they showed that brands who are doing brand marketing generally, what happens is their performance marketing is more efficient, so their CPAs and ROAS will actually increase as a result of having done brand marketing. Um, System One's done some research on this as well, that they showed that ads that have, sort of rank in the highest for brand performance can also produce a short-term sales lift. Doesn't work the other way, sadly. So performance-driven advertising doesn't really produce a long-term brand benefit. So I think I brand. I mean, this whole dichotomy people argue about, but like brand advertising can absolutely do both. And the way that I think of it, brand versus performance, is this one system one and one system two, right? One is more kind of like heuristic, it's more brand associations, DBAs, and just simple brand salience. You're just reminding people you exist, right? And you're not really trying to communicate a complex message. It's more like, hey, we're here, don't forget about us when you're buying. Whereas performance marketing tends to be more system two. It's more product driven. It's more um, transactional. So I think they're different. They're quite different types of messaging. The other interesting thing I'd say is like there's been some research to show that you know some brands have two tracks. So they'll have like a
Mhm.
brand media and say performance media, or they'll do what's called double duty, where you're essentially trying to do both a brand and performance in the same creative. In Australia, the one example I can think of is KFC does this a lot. It's sort of their TVCs are very brand, but then they sort of bookend with a product price offer, which I find really interesting. So the research though supports this idea that that double duty ads don't work as hard as two separate tracks because it is very hard to have both a system one and a system two message in the same creative. It certainly can be done, but and it can be effective, but the research supports it's more effective by separating them out. Yeah.
Mhm. I think we talked about ROAS a little bit, but we didn't expand on it. You also penned a very insightful article saying that it's a very faulty metric. Would you like to speak to it?
Yeah, I mean, ROAS has been seductive and useful in the digital age to help people understand what's driving performance, right? The problem with ROAS and attribution is that it's not about incrementality. Honestly, people at work are sick of me talking about incrementality. But and this is a point people need to understand. Attribution is just about assigning a value to a channel. It's like we made $100. Well, we think Meta drove 20 of that, Google drove 50, whatever, right? It doesn't answer the question, would we have sold this product if we had not run this ad in the first place?
Mhm.
And I've experienced this where in past lives we've run incrementality studies and found that, Meta's telling us we're getting 1,000% ROAS.
Mhm.
Then when we run an incrementality study, the incremental return is almost zero. Like people they would have already bought this product if and the ads were simply served to people who were already going to buy, right? And I think that's the problem with attribution. And this is where it gets interesting and a bit spicy in a retail media setting, because generally speaking, the closer you get to the point of conversion, the lower the incrementality. And it makes sense because people are already in a buying mode. They probably know what what they're gonna want. You serving them an ad may not change their mind at that
Mhm.
particular point in time. Um, in retail media, the all the measurements been on ROAS, right? Well, from a digital standpoint, anyway. They're starting to look at incrementality now, but I suspect a lot of retail media outlets are deeply concerned about opening up the hood to incrementality testing because I think they might find that not a lot of what brands have been doing is actually driving incremental revenue.
Mhm.
Again, I hope I'm wrong for a lot of brands, but I suspect that's a real concern from a lot of them as to why they don't want to do this. I mean, we at Mars, we've got an MMM. We're actually going to start mapping retail media into our MMM
Mhm.
to try and understand that point. We haven't got the data yet, but I think we will by the time we go to the next refresh. So incrementality in retail media is a whole new ball game, and I'm very curious to see what happens. My hypothesis is I don't think retail media in many situations is very incremental, but it seems to drive high ROAS, and people just can't get their heads around why there's such a discrepancy. But we'll wait and see.
Mhm. Let's talk about the effectiveness of some of the most famous ads. Apple's 1984 Super Bowl ad. Many people believe that is the best ad ever. And then we recently also had Formula One's Drive to Survive documentary. And both of them, claim that, a lot new net customers were added because of these ads. Do you think marketing creates demand?
Yeah, there's a couple of parts to this answer. So I might start with the latter part. The question on does marketing drive demand? You get these really polarizing hot takes on LinkedIn, especially around this. The people who say it doesn't drive demand will say, well, category drives demand. Marketers can't create demand. Like they can't simply convince someone to buy a watch if they weren't in the market for a watch, right? That's kind of that argument. And then on the other side of the fence, you've got people saying, well, no, like we can serve them an ad and they weren't going to buy a watch and now they will, blah, blah, blah. I kind of tend to think that, I mean, growth is driven primarily by two levers. Is the category growing and are you stealing share from competitors? Like they're your two sources of growth, right? And most new companies grow by category growth, not through they're just the rising tides lifting all boats, right?
Mhm.
The category the argument of does marketing drive demand? I mean, the idea of marketing is you should be priming future demand, right? So I mean, create is probably the word people get hung up on. Does it prime future demand? Absolutely.
Mhm.
Creating demand is probably the contentious thing, but a lot of that is category growth and then making sure that we are in front of people who are entering the
Mhm.
category is probably the way I would think about that. I'm not sure that's a particularly good answer, but that's what it is. And then, well, on Apple and Drive to Survive, yeah. I mean, again, I've seen hot takes on both sides. I mean, a friend of mine, a guy called John James, another good one to follow on LinkedIn. Actually, he's great because he's a real contrarian. He doesn't mind calling a spade a spade. He is deeply cynical of the impact of that ad. He talks more about other factors that Apple were looking at, whether it was distribution or supply or penetration and product development and all these sort of things, right? And he thinks that ad's been massively overhyped in terms of its importance. I I kind of think of this more through the lens of like, well, like again, using like an MMM analogy, right? Like, would if I think all these things that Apple did had compounding network effects. So Apple had a massive turnaround under Steve Jobs, of which that ad was one part of their entire. To say that that's all that, to say that the Apple ad saved Apple, it almost does Apple a disservice because it kind of implies that they were doing nothing else
Hmm.
and just doing creative ads through, oh, who was their agency? Was it BB? I forget who it was. But the yeah, it kind of almost does it because they yes that they were doing that, but
Hmm.
there was also a whole bunch of other stuff that they were doing as well. So I think people tend to over and underestimate the impact of advertising. I mean, I suspect the Apple ad was a part of the entire network effect that made Apple what it is. Um, did it save the company single-handedly? No, it did not. But did it have an impact on how we're still talking about it today? So I think we can't deny that it's had an impact. Um, and I think Drive to Survive, exactly the same thing, right? Like Formula One, this whole Netflix documentary was not like their marketing plan was not do a Netflix doco, right? Like it would have been that would have been a key plank of it, but they're doing a whole bunch of other stuff as well. So I think it's often hard to untangle and disseminate
Hmm.
what drove impact. And I think that yes, it was good. Could Formula One have had a renaissance without Drive to Survive? I think it could have. But with that as part of the mix, alongside all the other stuff it was doing, it had stronger network effects, right? So I think that's the way I tend to look at it.
Got it. Uh, yeah, so now we are moving to the last few questions. Of course, people used to say that software is going to eat the world. Now people say AI is going to eat the world. What are your views on AI overview from Google? Will it affect how pet care brands get discovered since you're working at Mars?
Yeah. It's going to be super interesting. We were talking about this the other day because one of our key priorities is to what we call POMI, so point of market entry. It's this idea of like when someone enters the category, or in our case, it means they're buying a dog or a cat, they're becoming a pet parent. We being able to get them to buy one of our Mars products as their first product is really important because then they generally hang around for about 12 months and then when they go back out to the market after their kitten or puppy becomes a cat or a dog, then obviously they change the food that they're serving them, but then our brand is already part of the repertoire. So yeah, it becomes a bit of a lifetime customer value sort of piece. And we were talking about search in the context of that, and what is it now? I mean, Gartner's predicting, searches are going to decrease by 25%. 6 in 10 Google searches are zero click. The rise of TikTok and these other platforms as primary as search competitors to Google. But then also you're seeing data that Google searches are increasing. So it's not like, the percentage of searches that are going from Google to OpenAI or Perplexity, it's still minuscule. They're tiny, tiny, tiny numbers. And even like the data now showing how people are using ChatGPT or using Claude. It's almost this B2C versus B2B dynamic, right? Like it's really interesting, but still a very small proportion. But I think, will it change how people use search? I mean, yeah, I mean, if you're a performance marketer and your CPCs are going up and your clicks are going down, and your boss wants clicks, then you've either got two options. You either divest from that platform or you have a conversation internally around, well, you know, people are still getting hit with impressions. Like maybe we need to change what we define success by. are we now optimizing towards a CPM objective and thinking of Google more as a broadcast channel rather than a click to website play? So I think, there will be some people who are spending a lot and going, well, CPCs are going up, clicks are going down. This is all just too hard. I'm going to put my money elsewhere. But I think the smart marketers will just change the way that they view success and think of it in the way that it's evolving into. So yeah, and again, like everything, it's kind of making sure that you've got a omni-channel performance piece in play here. So yeah, it's I think the death of Google as a search vehicle has been wildly exaggerated, but I think there are some trends people need to be aware of. And I think particularly zero sum click is the one that really struck me, that 6 in 10
Yeah.
stat, and seven in 10 when it's an AI generated response. So it's we can't ignore that, and we need to think about how we use that medium as a result.
Yeah, I believe that, inertia could be a boon or a bane, but I think in this case for Google, it's a boon for them, right? I mean, they haven't given enough reasons for people to switch over to Perplexity. Yeah, it is getting a little bit redundant. The answers are not that accurate as they were before. But yeah, I think there are still not enough reasons to switch over to a new, search engine. Would you agree?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Yeah, yeah.
Uh, so Ben, last question, any books or resources you would recommend to marketeers or brand managers?
Yeah, probably the books that I started reading when I first got into it, and I'm upstairs in my study,
Oh, nice.
and I've got all my books, so I actually don't have to remember them. I can just literally turn open here and have a look. The some of the best books I read were, look, I think the Better Brand Health books. Sorry, Better Brand Health is by a lady called Jenny Romaniuk, which talks a lot about distinctive brand assets. And also like how you track distinctive brand assets through a codified measurement system, I think is a really great book, and I really enjoyed that. The other one I was trying to find, I can't see where I've put it. Oh, yeah, a great book called Eat Your Greens is a fantastic book all around like marketing principles and philosophy, and a whole bunch of kind of vignettes on different parts of it. There's another great book, How Not to Plan, similar to how you eat your greens, but covers a whole range of marketing topics and kind of debunks a lot of widely held conceptions around marketing. I think, look, the OGs, How Brands Grow and How Brands Grow Part Two, I think are seminal textbooks that really all marketers need to have read at some point in their lives. Um, the other one I'd recommend is a book called Alchemy by a guy called Rory Sutherland. For those who don't know, Rory Sutherland works for Ogilvy UK, and he's one of the preeminent voices in the application of behavioral science in marketing. And it's a fantastic book because it kind of a lot of what he says just distills down to this idea that we can't predict. Humans think we're very good at predicting what will work, and his whole philosophy is that no, you can't. Like you need a bit of alchemy, you need a bit of magic because a lot of like humans, we love to comfort ourselves in thinking that we can read trends and patterns and so forth. But again, bringing this back to an MMM, like an MMM can only model the data you give it, right? If you've never done
Yeah.
something before, it can't tell you if it works. So that's the alchemy part, right? That's the part where we need to try different things, experiment. He's got this wonderful analogy around beehives, and this is a nice way to explain why innovation is so important. So I'm gonna do him a disservice by the way I deliver this story, but in a beehive, about 20% of the bees don't go to known pollen sources, right? They just
Mhm.
randomly kind of explore. 80% know what they're doing. They go to the pollen and they come straight back. They're very efficient. The 20% are incredibly inefficient. But what they're doing is they're finding new pollen sources so the hive can grow and thrive. If 100% of the bees went to the known pollen sources, all the pollen sources would go and the hive would die, right? And so, in our strive for efficiency, we forget that we need to be finding new pollen sources. And so I really like that as an analogy. So that's one of these kind of things he talks about. But I think it's just a reminder that in this world of logic and efficiency and data-driven insights, there is a place for this kind of out of the box creative thinking. So yeah, definitely one to add to the list as well. And there's a whole bunch of others, but they're probably the yeah, they're probably the main ones I'd say.
Ben, this has been really wonderful. Thanks for your time. Thanks for sharing all these insights and wisdom. Of course, we just scratched the surface, but I'm going to have you, next time on another podcast and, dive deeper into all the topics that we discussed. But thanks for your time. It was really a pleasure talking to you today.
Nah, pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Venkat. And yeah, we'll chat again soon.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, mate.